My name is Anna Ablove, and today I'll be presenting our work on the digital effects of sanctions, specifically in the case of the US embargo on Cuba. So for the past 3 decades, research on digital inequities has largely focused on nation-state censors restricting information access of their own citizens. But in recent years, there's been growing evidence of the potential effects of digital sanctions to cause harm to users in sanctioned states, such as Russia, Iran, Syria, and Cuba. For example, sanctions can prompt the withdrawal of big tech companies, and this can further isolate users in those regions. But such concerns about internet freedom have yet to be systematically examined. In this work, we focus on Cuba, the target of the longest-running trade embargo in modern history. It was enacted in 1962 in an attempt to stifle the spread of communism, but it continues to impact every aspect of life on the island to this day, especially when it comes to things like internet access, where matters are only made worse by restrictions put in place by the Cuban government. For example, it was actually illegal to own a personal computer or cell phone until 2008, and once this was repealed, US sanctions contributed to extensive delays on the building of a subsea telecom cable, which wasn't completed and operational until 2013. Beyond these infrastructure limitations, access to specific web services has also been a major point of contention. We've seen reporting from news media organizations such as ABC, NBC, and Time Magazine that have discussed how the volatility of US sanctions can cause tech companies to really abruptly restrict their services and leave Cuban citizens scrambling for alternatives. At a network level, we can kind of briefly step through this here. So to comply with sanctions, engineers must implement a location-based blocking on the server side, which we can call geoblocking. And we can see how this is distinct from censorship by the Cuban government, which would occur within the bounds of Cuba's own autonomous systems. So just stepping through this process again, so regulatory bodies publish sanctions. At this point, then service providers have to interpret them, and they can be very dense and confusing, legislative language speaking. And then they proceed with an implementation of geoblocking. And finally, Cuban users can no longer successfully request these geoblocked domains. Now, in order to investigate this ecosystem, we really had to consider the what's and how's of geoblocking. Specifically, we asked the following questions. What sort of content is geoblocked? Next, how is geoblocking implemented at the network layer, and how does this impact auditability? This is especially important because there's actually no technical specifications for how geoblocking is implemented. And finally, how do current implementations help or hurt user-facing transparency? Considering sanctions aim to place pressure on target nations, it's important that geoblocking is easily attributable, and it should be distinguishable from other reasons for connection failure. Again, these questions are important to identify the gaps in understanding between policymakers and service providers, and overall better characterize the effects of digital sanctions. However, before proceeding with this work, there were a lot of challenges and considerations. First and foremost, regarding ethics. So ethics is always of paramount importance for this kind of study, but the addition of sanctions actually required a rather unconventional approval process. So in addition to getting approval from our IRB, we actually also had to consult with the Office of Foreign Assets Control, or OFAC, in order to proceed with this work. Also, obtaining a vantage point in Cuba is especially challenging. So a combination of sanctions and poor infrastructure make renting a server prohibitive. And this is even before considering prior work, which establishes residential vantage points as more representative of true user experiences. To this end, we rely on a collaborator and get a vantage point in the state-owned and only public Cuban ISP. Additionally, we really make it a priority to center the user experience and take the time to learn about the impact of geoblocking firsthand before diving straight into measurements. So we engaged with 10 tech-savvy Cuban internet users in a preliminary small-scale user study. Through a combination of multiple choice and write-in responses, we observed consistent levels of frustration about the embargo and its negative impacts, especially when it comes to things like career opportunities and general information access, with one participant highlighting how it makes it impossible to create projects that can be used internationally. Other excerpts from the write-in responses are shown here as well. Also, our participants report 123 domains as geoblocked, which we include in our measurement test list. Interestingly, our participants also highlight a lack of geoblocking transparency, reporting different sorts of user-facing errors as geoblocking. With these insights, we can now move on to our systematic measurements of geoblocking. Leveraging the Tranco domain rankings, we select the 10,000 most popular domains and add those referred from the user study. We take many steps to accurately and specifically identify geoblocking in the face of other reasons for connection failure, such as poor network conditions or censorship by the Cuban government. For the latter case, we run trace routes to isolate the location of failure as proximal to the end server. Additionally, we consider all returned response pages, comparing content between Cuba and the control to identify instances of geoblocking block pages. For the sake of time, we'll only go further in depth on this block page attribution process. We start out by isolating responses from Cuba that vary in length from the control, so that's that length difference box there. Then we proceed with the page text normalization process, and this involves removing extraneous elements, things like reference IDs or timestamps that are interchangeable between block pages. And then finally, we cluster. We label clusters with standard codes 403 forbidden or 451 unavailable for legal reasons, which indicate a server-side error as geoblocking. And this can help us find non-standard block pages like this one in the orange from mathworks.com, which despite serving a block page fingerprint that we find solely associated with other 403 forbiddens, is actually incorrectly served with a 404 not found. For the rest, we look through them to find instances of geoblocking explicit language, and this helps us find block pages that are more personalized. So in the green, this is an example from Ola VPN, which is actually served with a 200 OK, which should ideally indicate a successful request. Following our attribution pipeline, we actually visit the websites of all geoblocked domains to find disclosures of embargo compliance. Given the complicated and confusing nature of sanctions legislation, these disclosures really serve to help us confirm and support a subset of our findings, and in general make our auditing more complete. But they're not required, so the absence of one does not necessarily negate prior determination of geoblocking. Additionally, it's important to highlight that these disclosures are not helpful to Cuban users. For example, Match.com openly discloses compliance in its terms of service, but geoblocks with an uninformative TCP error, leaving Cuban users unable to determine whether their result was subject to geoblocking or merely a result of poor network conditions. Now for our results. At a high level, we find 546 domains geoblocked by 17 distinct implementations, the most popular being 403 forbidden and TCP timeouts. Bucketing by popularity, we can also see higher levels of blocking in the more popular domains, with 27% of blocked domains ranking in the top 2,000 from the Tranco list. Regarding geoblocked content, so kind of the sorts of content that's geoblocked, we find the highest numbers of domains in the categories of technology, business, and economy and finance. While some types of services like e-commerce more explicitly fall under the scope of sanctions, we also see blocking in categories like education and communication tools, which are a bit more ambiguous. We can also highlight the minimal user transparency. An overwhelming 88% of domains do not serve informative notice of why they are blocked. Beyond implementations of geoblocking that occur at network stages before a page is served, which all provide no transparency to the end user, block pages themselves also vary in clarity. So we make an effort to categorize the transparency of block pages. Firstly, informative or fully transparent, vague, which indicates some notion of intentional blocking, or none, which provides no additional information. This would include things like the notice of an unsuccessful request. Of the 395 domains that serve block pages, we find only 79 do so informatively. We can also highlight a lack of standardization that makes our auditing more complicated. Existing infrastructure like content distribution networks, or CDNs, can streamline geoblocking by providing standardized block pages that use accepted error codes. However, we still see a wide variety of geoblocking implementation in these popular CDNs, with all but one of the providers deploying a wide variety of implementations. We even find 32 block pages served with 200 OKs, which again are the status code that should indicate a successful request. We can also highlight the relationship between standardization and transparency. To really emphasize just how easy it can be to deploy informative block pages, we can take a look at these two that are served in the same autonomous system. They're actually completely identical, except for the highlighted phrases. The upper page specifies the Amazon CloudFront distribution is configured to block access to your country, while the lower merely notes request blocked, which arbitrarily leaves users with unnecessary confusion. So what can be done? We recommend that service providers implement geoblocking in a standardized and informative manner, which eases auditability and provides transparency to end users. This includes deploying informative block pages and making use of the standard RFC error codes 403 forbidden and 451 unavailable for legal reasons. This being said, for large-scale impactful change, we really encourage policymakers to take action as well. The US government has repeatedly emphasized its commitment to the free flow of information in Cuba, spending $47 million in the past 3 years on the Office of Cuba Broadcasting to bring free information to the Cuban people. But policymakers must more directly engage with service providers to make better strategies to reduce this internet splintering. Finally, given the challenges of this work, at a scale of 10,000 domains in a single country, we can highlight the opportunities for future research efforts using technical skills to meaningfully audit geoblocking. We should engage more as a community and help bring transparency and clarity to all phases of digital sanctions, from legislation to deployment. Thank you for your time, and I can now open the floor to questions.